I'd like this to be the start of a series of opinion pieces, not so much based on the science or a recent scientific publication, but more so on my opinion. Now, I often say that half my job, up till now, last 30-some years, has been to dispel bad information. But that balance has shifted lately to the point where misinformation, disinformation has become the dominant form of information. That is, good information is becoming a rare commodity. That is, bad information seems now to dominate. It's even coming from a lot of influencers, my colleagues who've chosen to come on this medium as well as others, and dispelling bad information. For instance, I've seen this conversation that we should do away with cholesterol, which I agree with, and replace it with a measure called apoprotein B, which is just another level of misinformation that supports the statin drug industry. In other words, some of these influencers, some of these advocates of that idea have chosen to use this somewhat better issue of apoprotein B over cholesterol as yet another reason to take a statin drug, which of course is completely absurd. We need to do away with the whole notion of total cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, statin cholesterol drugs, because they have nothing to do with heart disease. So as I often say, the great tragedy of that line of misinformation is that the real causes of heart disease are largely neglected. And yet they're easy to identify and address. If you know what I'm talking about, please see my other videos, my Defiant Health podcast, my thousands of blog posts, my over a dozen books. I've tried to propagate these ideas, but I'm one person, and I can only have so much of an impact. But by the way, this is part of my motivation for doing this, to try to get more of this information out to people, because I see the pharmaceutical industry, the healthcare industry, not all, but many of my colleagues profiting from misinformation. This came to a head this morning. I was thinking about this disaster called GLP-1 Agonist drugs. Those of you who've not been watching the news may not know that GLP agonist drugs, injectable and oral, are used for weight loss. So what's the big deal? Americans are obese, overweight. It's huge. It's an epidemic. By the way, caused by flawed dietary guidelines, by the predatory and exploitative practices of the food industry and other factors. But the GLP-1 agonist drug world has become extremely popular because it's a quick fix, an apparent quick fix to lose weight. Do they work? Oh, absolutely. There's no question about that. If you inject or take orally one of these drugs, you will lose weight. It's very consistent effect. So what's the problem? Well, a lot of problems. Let's put aside the near-term side effects. Nausea, vomiting. If a pregnant woman takes it, she can actually aspirate, inhale her vomit. This has happened and women have died of this. It can cause thyroid cancer and bowel obstruction, which is a surgical emergency. Let's put aside all that. Let's accept that there are near-term side effects, that this is not a mystery. But there are long-term consequences of this quick fix for weight loss. And pivotal in these drugs, the effect of these drugs, is loss of muscle. Now, people say things like, especially females, say things like, who cares? I don't care if I lose muscle. Muscle's not important. No. Muscle is critical for your long-term health. If you lose muscle, that is more than the 30% of muscle you lose just by aging. So since age 30 or so, most of us will lose 30%, often more, of our muscle mass, such that when you were young, about 40+%, 42, 43% or so of your body weight at normal weight was muscle. By the time you get into your 70s, it's more in the 20s, 20-some percent of your body weight. So you lose a huge amount of muscle. What does that mean? Well, it accelerates, or it allows your deterioration in life to falls, fractures. And recall that if you have a hip fracture, you're likely to die in about a year. If you don't succumb to that fracture, just having the disability of that fracture, you're likely to die within the next year. So falls, fractures, frailty, Do you want to be one of those people riding a cart in the grocery store, or has to have somebody hide in your house to feed you or take you to the toilet? So frailty and earlier death. That part is often not talked about. Yet we have the benefit of huge databases that have, to their great credit, these groups who've done this. They've tracked tens of thousands of people, in aggregate over 60,000 people over many years, 10 years in some of these databases or more. So tens of thousands of people tracked over many years. What happens to people who lose weight, particularly if you lose 10% or more of your body weight? So if you're 180 pounds and you lose 18 pounds, 10%, you're likely to die several years younger. This is very consistent finding across numerous databases. The NHANES database from our own NIH, the EPIC Norfolk database from Western Europe, the ASPRI database, on and on and on. Numerous databases have all shown if you lose weight, 10% or more of your body weight, you will die several years younger. Now let's ask, how did the majority of those people lose weight? Well, most people lose weight by some version of reducing calorie intake. It could be a diet program you paid a lot of money for. It could be a meal replacement program where they supplied meals for you that were reduced in calories. It could be a bariatric procedure, lap band, gastric bypass, several other versions. It could be a pharmaceutical. Most popular, of course, the GLP-1 agonists. All of these are variations in the same theme, reducing calorie intake. So GLP-1 agonists, for instance, reduce your interest in food and slow stomach emptying, gastric emptying, such that you're satiated for extended periods and thereby your caloric intake is much reduced. We know when you reduce calories, you lose huge amounts of muscle, typically 25%. If you lose 40 pounds, for instance, by injecting some GLP-1 agonist, 10 pounds is muscle. Should you stop that drug, which because most people can't afford it forever, you'll regain fat, typically more than you had in the beginning, but you won't regain the muscle, very little. Now this came to a head, this idea of trying to dispel misinformation, because I was reading some editorials from my colleagues in otherwise well-respected journals that were saying that the muscle loss from GLP agonists is expected and normal and healthy. They actually said this, that if you adjust the muscle mass of a person who lost a lot of muscle to the new weight, it's okay. Ignoring all the phenomena that have been observed in people who've lost that muscle, including a drop in what's called myokines. These are peptides that mediate all the beneficial effects of musculature. The increase in adipokines, that is the mediators of fat and all its adverse metabolic effects. All the insulin resistance, inflammatory in other words, if you lose muscle, health deteriorates dramatically. Yet I have colleagues who are saying, oh, no, it's okay. Who paid for those reviews and editorials? Of course, the pharmaceutical industry. All these companies that manufacture and making literally billions of dollars from those drugs have paid my colleagues to voice opinions favorable to that class of drugs. This is what we're up against. That is, not only does the pharmaceutical industry produce drugs that are harmful to your health, now the doctors themselves, most of them, not all of them, of course, but many of them now defend this awful, awful class of drugs that destroy your health long-term. Near-term benefits, long-term destruction of your health because you lose muscle, because your basal metabolic rate, the rate at which you burn calories, is reduced permanently. You regain the weight when you stop the drugs as fat, mostly abdominal fat, insulin resistance, inflammation, myokine levels are reduced. In other words, your health is destroyed. Yet you paid thousands of dollars for that privilege, And now many of my colleagues are apologizing or defending that class of drugs. So this idea of first do no harm, that's long gone. It is do harm if it makes money. That is the new mantra of healthcare, sadly. So I'm mindful that this can't be just my rant about the negative things going on in healthcare. It has to be positive also. Recognize that preservation of muscle is the new paradigm. We can't just talk about weight loss per se. We have to talk about specifically targeting loss of abdominal, visceral fat while preserving or even increasing muscle. So one of the themes I advocate is not treating things like overweight or obesity, but to address factors that should have been part of your life or should not have been part of your life all along. So starting that conversation is the elimination of all wheat and grains from your life, as I articulated in my Wheat Belly series of books. This thing we're being sold called wheat is not wheat. It looks like wheat. It's kind of related to wheat, but it's this thing created essentially by genetics research. It's 18 inches tall. It has a thick stalk, large seed head. It is biochemically very different from what grew wild in the Middle East 10,000 years ago that humans first consumed as this thing called wheat. So start that conversation with eliminating things that should never have been part of your diet in the first place. In that list, wheat, grains, because grains are all related. They're very closely related. They're very promiscuous genetically, as well as modern additives to food. It could be preservatives, could be emulsifying agents, could be sugar, could be high fructose corn syrup, could be coloring agents, could be artificial flavorings, all the things that should not be part of your food. So this conversation begins, this rejection of idiotic ideas like GLP-1 agonists and embracing the way things should have been all along. So I hope this begins a series of conversations that are more opinion as well as ideas based on fact and evidence.